Hi, I'm Soc. Today I'll be taking you through the workshop, One-Click Loyalty Signups with Google Pay. In this workshop, we'll be following along with the code lab. The details of the code lab should be included in the session resources. In case you don't have that, this is the link. And in this workshop, we'll cover the process of creating a loyalty program, integrating with the Passes API to create a loyalty pass, as well as saving the passes to Google Pay. All right, here we go. So where we'll start is just a quick overview. This code lab comes with a Q&A feature. So next to the live stream button, you should see a Q&A link to the right. If at any point during the workshop you need help, please ask it in the Q&A, and one of our teaching assistants will be on standby to help you out. The steps we'll follow for this workshop include some initial setup, which will help us set up a number of our dependencies. We'll create a loyalty program. We'll then use the APIs to create a loyalty pass. We'll create a JSON web token, sometimes referred to as JWT or JOT, and we'll use that JOT to save the pass to Google Pay. And then we'll wrap it up with some next steps that you can follow. So to start with, we'll go through the initial setup. As part of the initial setup, one of the things that we typically need to do is decide what type of environment we're going to use for the workshop. Today, I'll be going through the workshop in a remote development environment using Cloud Shell. And if you've got multiple monitors, my advice is to make use of those monitors, possibly have one screen with the live feed going and another screen with your code lab. If you don't have multiple monitors, multiple windows work just as well. So what we'll do is we'll switch back to the code lab. So switching there. First place to start is jumping to getting set up. And I'm going to click the Run Cloud Shell button here. What this will do is it'll provision a brand new Cloud Shell environment for me to run in. This takes a couple seconds, maybe 20, 30 seconds to set up. But it's the equivalent of giving you like a development environment. And that's pretty handy for the purpose of the workshop because all the dependencies that you'll need will already been installed. This includes Git, the Cloud Shell command line, as well as NPM and Node, which is what we'll be running in. So one of the first steps that we need to do is get the source code, and we'll do that by grabbing the git clone command and copy that into our Cloud Shell environment over here, the terminal window, and just paste that. That should happen pretty quickly. There's not a lot of source code there. And what I'm going to do is jump into the directory. So change directory into the GPay Loyalty API demo folder. And then I'm also going to open up the files just so that we can refer to them later on. Just give that a few more seconds. Actually, while we wait for that, we'll just jump to the next step on in the setup. So one of the first things that we need to do is set up an environment variable, and we'll use that to remember the name of our project. So the name of the project should be something like your username and dash loyalty. The main requirements here, so I'm going to use Soc Sieng demo dash loyalty. But the main requirements here is that you don't use any of the reserved words, so any alphanumeric characters and dashes will do, and it just needs to be unique. It needs to be a unique name. So that's why I'm using Soc Sieng demo loyalty. We'll set up that variable, and that's going to be used in a number of our commands coming up. The next one being scripts, service account key. This script here will actually create a GCP project for us with the same name. It'll prompt you to authorize the request, and I'll do that. In this process, it actually collapses like a 10-step process in the tutorial setting up guide into one command here. But yes, because the project doesn't exist, we're going to authorize that, hit yes to create it. And while we're waiting for that to finish, what it's doing is it's creating a GCP project for us. It's also creating a service account, which will be used to for the API to interact with the Parsers API. Sorry, our application to interact with the Parsers API. And it'll also download a key.json file. So over here, you'll see the service account that was created, and you'll see that the credentials were downloaded as a key.json file here. And the next step we want to do is we actually want to we'll want to tell our application about where to find the path. So you can where to find the key.json file, and you can do that by executing this this command to export the variable, evaluating the real path. And just double check that quickly. We'll just echo that to the terminal. So that's all going well. We've set up the service account key, and we've downloaded it. It's available in our Cloud Shell environment. So moving on to the next step, what we need to do is enable the Parsers API. We're going to do that by using a shell script that I created earlier, passing the project ID, and this should enable the Parsers API. Now, if this is the first time if this is the first time you've enabled or used this account, the enable API script might fail for you about missing terms and conditions. So you can do that by clicking on the link and accepting terms and conditions and running that again. So I'll give it a second for everyone to catch up. And we'll switch back to the code lab. So that part has really been focused on setting up our Cloud Shell and our cloud dependencies. What we need to do is set up some of our local dependencies. There's a script that we've got here which will enable, it will download our dependencies. And the reason it's a script as opposed to, say, an npm install is because our project is actually made up of multiple node packages, or node projects, I should say. This will take a few minutes. I'll take this time to actually go through the folder structure. Over here, we've got a functions folder. The functions folder is where our backend for the sample application will live. So this is, think of it as the APIs that will power our client-side application. It is a Firebase functions project, and the bulk of it is initialized through index.js. And if you have a look at it here, there's some basic setup, but the guts of what we're dealing with will be in the loyalty routes definition here, which you can find in loyalty.js. And again, this is where the bulk of our sample application lives. We've registered a number of routes with the prefix API/loyalty. And the bulk of what we're going to cover will be defined in the create account method. This create account method is just a bit further down. And as you can see, we've got some placeholders for different steps that we're going to execute throughout the code lab. Over here, the basic implementation is to actually throw an error. As through the course of the code lab, we'll actually address this and implement this function. Additionally, we've got the www folder. This is where the front end of our application lives. It's a React application. And the bulk of what we're going to be dealing with here is we'll be in the loyalty folder, and we'll be dealing with sign up as the main feature here. If you look at sign up, there's not too much to it. We've got an HTML form. It has a name field and a name text box, email address, a checkbox, and a button. So while I was distracting you with the folder structure, the dependencies were installed. The next step that we want to do is just check to make sure that it works. So we can do that by running scripts and serve. This script does a couple of things. One of those is build the React application that we were just talking about. So bundles the JavaScript, gets ready to serve. And then finally, it serves up the application using a local Firebase instance. And as you can see here, it's actually being loaded. It's ready and it's available on port 8080. And what we'll do is we'll actually just go to the web preview button up the top and preview it on port 8080. So if everything went well, you should end up with a screen that looks a bit like this. And what we'll do is we'll jump into the first link here, which is loyalty signup. And as I was showing you in the React application, there's a name, there's an email address, a checkbox, and a sign up button. And if we go through and complete this form, what you should see is a failure. And the reason for this is, if you recall, we hadn't actually implemented the required API or the methods. So over here, yes, there's an error. Everything checks out. Let's move on to the next step. Let's go back to the slides. So we did this. We downloaded the source. We set up the cloud project, set up the service account key, downloaded the service account key as well. And we enabled the Parsers API. We also chose our project ID, set up that project variable, and also download the service account key and set up the environment variable. One thing I should add, it might be handy if we just switch back to the demo. So to minimize our tab usage, let's close the window that we just launched and press Control-C to stop serving the site. What we can do is, if we just show the GCP, the credentials again, what we can do is save it to a file that should have been created for you, which is the .env file. And we'll put the absolute path in here. So this can be valuable if, for whatever reason, the Cloud Shell environment gets reset. This can happen due to inactivity. So when we come back to this, you can always pick up where you left off. So this just allows us to use the environment variables and have them persisted. Let's head back to the slides. Yeah, so just as a reminder, this will make it easy to pick up where you left off if, for whatever reason, the Cloud Shell instance gets restarted. We enabled the Passes API, and we also did some of the application setup, such as installing the project dependencies and giving the website a quick test. All right, so now that we've set up the project dependencies, what we'll do is go through the process of creating a loyalty program. The loyalty program, this setup requires the following steps. So we need to create a temporary issuer account. And then we also need to grant access to the temporary issuer account for to our service account. And then we'll finally go through the process of defining the loyalty program. So a little information about the temporary issuer account. It's something that's created for the purpose of this code lab only. It's not appropriate for use in production. And the link to create a temporary issuer account is there. It's also in the code lab. I'll switch to the window shortly to go through it. But yeah, what we'll be doing is creating a temporary issuer account with the Google account that you're using to complete the code lab. And we'll also tell the application about the issuer account so that the API can make the changes on our behalf. And we'll need to remember things like issuer ID later on, and I'll go through that in a bit more detail. Let's switch back to the code lab. So we're going to move to step 3 and create the temporary issuer account. There's a link here, create temporary issuer account. And I'm just going to use the same email that I'm using for this code lab and hit create. So again, this is a temporary issuer account. It'll be used for the purpose of this code lab only. I'm going to switch back to the window because there's some code that I need to copy and paste. So over here, we've got the export statement. I'm going to paste that into the Cloud Shell terminal and replace the issuer ID with the issuer ID in this window. So this is just telling our application what our issuer ID is. It'll be used and passed into some of the APIs that we call later on. And for good measure, I'm also going to update the .env file to include the issuer ID. Again, the reason for this is if we have to restart for whatever reason, it'll be remembered here. Okay. So once we've done that, what we'll do is we'll jump into the Merchant Center to create our loyalty program. And to do that, we'll just jump back into this window here, which has the issuer ID. The Merchant Center link should launch directly into your issuer account. What we're going to be doing is sharing our account with the service account that we created earlier. So hit the share account button. And what we're going to do is jump back to Cloud Shell because we want the email address from our key.json file. So you should see the key.json here. And let's just grab the details in the client email. So I'll copy that and switch back to the Merchant Center here. And under invite people, we'll invite the service account. We'll leave it as can edit and hit the add person button here. Once we're done, We'll hit Save Changes and cancel. So that part is all about just making sure that when we call the APIs have the appropriate permissions to manage and administer the loyalty passes on our behalf. Now, what we want to do is create the loyalty program itself. We do that by clicking on the loyalty classes link over here. And create new. So there are some values in the code lab that I suggest that we just reuse, copy and paste. So let's scroll a bit further down. Move on to step 4, create a loyalty program. And here are some recommended values. So code lab with your name. I'm just going to close some of these windows, some tabs, I should say. All right, so issuer name, code lab, followed by your name. In my case, it's Soc. The class ID, I recommend we stick to the default in the code lab, which is code lab demo. We'll change the status to under review. Specify that the country code, choose your country of preference. Mine is the US. And the next field that we need to do is supply an image for the loyalty pass logo. The main requirement here is that it's accessible, publicly accessible. I'm actually going to use this one here. I recommend you do as well. So copy the link there and paste it into this, this field. And the last one was the program name. And the program name is actually found all the way down the bottom in the last section here under loyalty data, loyalty program. There's actually a lot more here that you can customize. We won't go through it in detail here, but it's something that you can come back to customize the loyalty pass itself. So if you have a particular brand or particular style that you're looking to implement in your loyalty pass, this is where you can do it. So things like the different logos, hero images, and background color, plus a number of other ones. Again, we won't go through it in detail here. This is something that you can do after the workshop. So once we've done that, we're going to hit create. And that should be it. We should now have a loyalty program that's been defined and is something that we can work with. Okay, so let's switch back to the slides. So we've created a temporary issuer account. We've granted the issuer account, the service account permissions to our issuer account. We've created a loyalty pass. And now what we want to do is tell our application about the loyalty program. So if you've kept the name the same as what was in the code lab, you should be able to just copy and paste this command as is. So let's switch back to the code lab. I'll copy and paste that. And that should be set up. And again, what I'll do here is I'll just add it to the environment.env file. Again, in case something goes wrong, it'll still be available later on. Slides. Okay, so we've defined the loyalty program. What we're going to go to now is actually look into the code a little more. So the code is going to be responsible for creating loyalty passes for the loyalty program. And what I'll do now is I'll switch back to the code lab. And yeah, for everyone following, that's now step 5. And what we want to do is jump to the loyalty service file. The loyalty service file will actually contain most of the logic that's required to connect to the Parsers API. So just in order to organize our code, this file will be responsible for receiving input from our application and then calling the appropriate APIs, the appropriate loyalty APIs to set things up. So jumping back to the code lab, what we want to do here is copy from step 1, which is the definition of the loyalty object. I'll copy and paste that, and I'll talk you through that in a bit more detail. So we're going to replace the definition here. So what we're doing is we're defining a loyalty object that will be later posted and updated on the loyalty APIs. First step here is we need to assign a loyalty ID. Now the loyalty ID is a string with the format of the issue ID followed by a period and some unique identifier for your loyalty program. We're going to be passing in email address as the identifier, but typically you might want to use like a membership ID for your loyalty program if you've got one available. We're also passing it to a method called getLoyaltyID. And the reason for that is there's certain restrictions on the characters that can be used in the ID. So we're replacing special characters such as the @ symbol with @ and other non-valid characters with an underscore. So that's the reason we've got that there. And class ID typically is your issue ID with the loyalty program as an identifier. We're using an email address that will be passed in by the method calling this email address and the number of points to assign to the points balance. And that's the bulk of what you expect in a loyalty object. If we jump back to the code lab, you'll see that the next step involves calling the API to post the information. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. So over here, there's actually a bit more involved in setting up the Parsers client. I'm not going to get into that at the moment. Feel free to browse the implementation in your own time. But what we're doing is we're posting to this endpoint, we're posting the object, and we're also posting the ID using a method called post-if-not-found. The reason we're doing this as opposed to a direct post is to gracefully handle the scenario where the loyalty object for the particular email address already exists. So if it exists, what we'll do is it'll just skip it, but if it doesn't exist, we'll go off and create it. And then finally, we're returning the loyalty object. Well, let's head back to the code lab. And one of the things that I like to do, although this is completely optional, but it's really easy to do, is to include the barcode. So in this instance, we'll be including the QR code. Actually, I'm going to close this tab because we don't need it anymore. So what we'll do is we'll include the barcode in the loyalty object definition. And over here, we're saying it's a type QR code, and the QR code will be encoded with the user's email. And yeah, the reason I include this is actually an easy way to add it, and it makes for the use case of if somebody's at the point of sale and wanting to scan their loyalty code, loyalty pass. It makes it easier just by presenting it and having it scanned at the point of sale. Let's jump back to the code lab. No, actually, let's jump back to slides. Okay, we've gone through this step, created a loyalty object. We've posted the loyalty object and added a QR code. So next we need to create a JSON web token, which is a step required before saving the pass to Google Pay. So right now, the loyalty pass will only exist on the server. It doesn't have a relationship with a user yet. It's not in a user's Google Pay wallet. So it just exists as an object on the server. Even though it does have properties such as the user's name and email address, there is no direct relationship. So this is a step that we'll go through to help set that up. So what we need to do to create the JSON web token is we need to call the method that we just implemented, create loyalty object. We'll need to populate a number of claims on it. And then ultimately we need to create the job by signing it and returning it back to the caller. The JSON web token looks something like this. Sorry, let's switch back to the slides. The JSON web token looks something like this. So we've got the audience is Google. We've got the origins, which isn't too important now, but will be important when dealing with the Save to Google Pay button. Not covered in the workshop, but is there in the code lab. We've got the issuer, and in this case, the issuer is our service account. The type is Save to Wallet, and the payload actually details the details that we'll be saving as part of the loyalty pass. So this is ultimately what connects the loyalty object to a Google Pay user. All right, so let's switch back to the code lab. And we're now on step 6. So the bulk of what we'll focus on here will be the loyalty JavaScript file, and it'll be the create account method. And what we're going to want to do here is copy this line. And this line is responsible. Let me just scroll down. This line here is responsible for calling the create loyalty object method that we defined in the previous step. It passes in a name and email, which we get from the request here, the request body. We'll initialize the loyalty object to a 0 points balance. And so once we've got that, we've got the loyalty object. What we need to do now is define the claim. So I'll copy and paste this section. Just give me a second. That goes into step 2 for us. That's more than I wanted. Let me undo that. So here we're defining claims similar to what we went through before. The guts of what we need to define are here. So this takes in a list of loyalty objects. We're only going to provide one. And what we're going to do is get the ID that was that we set up previously and assign it there. And once we've defined the loyalty object, what we need to do is create and assign the JWT. And we can copy that from this section of code here. So JWT is an NPM package that we've installed, which deals with some JSON Web Token related logic. And we're calling the sign method with the claims that we defined earlier. And it's also using the credentials to grab the private key to sign. And the algorithm we're using is RS256. And the result of signing this is actually a string, a JOT formatted string. And what we'll do now is we'll also just return that just by copying response.json, returning a JavaScript object that includes a token. And if all goes well, it should look like this. Let's switch back to the slides. So we've populated the claims. We've created JOT and signed it. And we've returned the token as part of the API response. Yeah, this token will be used later on to generate the save to Google Pay URL. Okay, so we've now created a JSON Web Token, which acts a bit like a glue connecting the backend loyalty pass to a user, and that can be saved to the Google Pay wallet. And in order to save to Google Pay, we're going to call the API that we just implemented. And then we're going to use the result of the API, which was the JSON Web Token. And then we're going to take that and generate a link, which will then be used by Google Pay to save the loyalty pass for a particular user. Okay, so let's move on. We'll head back to the code lab. And we now return to step 7. So we've been focused on the backend part of our application so far. We're actually going to move to the front end, our React application, and we'll jump to the signup JavaScript file. So we'll jump to www source loyalty signup. And if you recall, we've got a form, and on submit, we call the submit handler, which is where we want to be focusing our attention. I'll jump to the code lab and copy the relevant snippet of code. And what we're doing here is we're using the fetch API to call the API that we had just implemented. So API/loyalty/create. It's a post method, and we're sending in the body the name and email address that comes from the form fields that we have defined in the UI. And once you make the request, we're just going to read the JSON file, sorry, the JSON response, and assign it to details. And then what we do here is we take the details and we assign it to a local variable called JWT through the set JWT method. Ignore the step 3. That's used for other parts of the code lab that are marked optional. We're not covering that as part of the workshop, but I suggest if you've got the time to come back and do that. So we'll call set JWT here to set up the local variable. Let's head back to slides. Okay, so we're calling that API method and then setting the JWT. And what we're going to do now is look at the sign up confirmation component. The sign up confirmation component takes in the JWT that we got from the API response and set to the local variable. So let's go back there. Let's head back to the code lab. And what we'll see is the component here. So what this is saying is if we have a JWT initialized, display the sign-up confirmation component, passing the JWT. And if we jump into the sign-up confirmation component, what you'll see here is an empty confirmation screen with step 1 still unimplemented. What we'll do now is we'll implement that. So we'll implement that by adding an anchor tag. I'm going to copy and paste that from step 7 of the code lab. And what we're actually doing here is this component takes in a JWT and it builds up a URL with the following prefix, which is the save to Google Pay prefix, and it includes the JWT here. And all this does is opens that link in a new window when it's clicked. What we're able to do now is actually test it to see if it works. So this should be the bulk of the integration here. So in the shell terminal window, we're going to run scripts, serve. There's a bit of lag in my... All right, and this will just go through and build the React application again and ultimately serve it for us to preview in web preview. And give it another few seconds. It should be ready to go now. So now when we hit web preview, we should see the same screen that we saw before. Clicking on loyalty sign up. What you should see here is the sign up form. If you fill in those details and hit sign up, instead of the error, we've got the confirmation screen with the URL that we, the anchor tag that we just created. And if you have a look at it down the bottom, or the link, let's actually click it. What you should get is a screen that prompts you to save the path to Google Pay. And what I'm going to do here is save it. And it's been saved to my Google Pay account. And finally, I'm just going to view that. And over here, you can see the points. We initialize that to 0. And we've got the QR code, email address, and other details here. Let's switch back to the slides. So we did that. We added the anchor tag, and we passed the JWT to the URL. Yeah, and if everything went well for you, you should be able to see a demo similar to what I went through earlier. And that was actually the bulk of it. As far as the next steps are concerned, first off, just want to congratulate you for getting this far. The next steps I would suggest is explore the rest of the code lab. There are a number of optional steps that have been included in the code lab that we just didn't have time to get through in this code lab. They include things like integrating with the Save to Google Pay button, which improves the user experience because it means that saving to Google Pay doesn't take the user out of the experience. There's a step that also includes how to update the loyalty pass, such as updating points for the loyalty program, the loyalty pass, I should say. And then if you want to do an Android integration, there's a quick step and code sample on how to add the Save to Google Pay button for your Android application using largely the same APIs and backend that we just created here. If you did want to do this seriously and take it to the next step, the recommendation is to sign up for an actual production issuer account, which will allow you to use it for more than just the code lab. And one other suggestion is to look at options to customize the loyalty program and the loyalty pass so that the loyalty pass itself can actually be more in line with what your brand is, with the look and feel of your brand. With that, I'd like to thank you all for coming along with me through the workshop. Again, my name is Soc. I'm a developer advocate with Google Pay. If you have any questions, please reach out to us on the various support channels. Twitter is one of those, at Google Pay Devs. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.